The badge, the power, and the mistake that changed everything. Every city has its own silent rules, and Millbrook was no exception. Here, power wasn't about justice. It was about control. Behind the polished precinct doors, behind the press conferences boasting about crime reduction, behind the neatly filed paperwork that justified every questionable arrest, there was a system. A system designed not to protect, but to dominate. And that system needed loyal enforcers. That's where Officer Ethan Carter came in, a rookie on a fast track. Ethan Carter had only been on the force for 6 months, but he already knew how things worked. He had the right attitude, the kind that made his superiors nod in approval. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. When Sergeant James Wilson, his mentor, had taken him aside on his first day, he laid it out simple. "We don't serve the law, kid. We are the law. Some people need to learn their place." And Carter had taken those words to heart. The precinct saw potential in him. He was sharp, confident, eager to prove himself. The kind of cop who knew which doors to knock on, which people to target, and which truths to bury. He learned fast. Too fast. Because the problem with arrogance, it makes you think you're invincible. And on one particular night, on one particular traffic stop, Ethan Carter made a mistake. A mistake that would rip apart the system that had protected him. The traffic stop that changed everything. It was just after midnight, and Carter was on patrol in Oakbrook, the wealthiest district in the city. The streets were quiet. Too quiet. His orders were clear. Make arrests, keep the crime numbers high, remind people who's in charge. And then he saw it. A black Range Rover rolling smoothly through the empty streets. Too expensive. Too clean. Too out of place for this time of night. His instincts sharpened. This was it. A perfect target. Carter flipped on his lights, the red and blue glow slicing through the darkness. The Range Rover pulled over with no hesitation. No sudden movements. Carter's fingers drummed against his holster as he approached the driver's side. When the window rolled down, he wasn't prepared for what he saw. A woman. Not just any woman. An elegant, composed, and deeply self-assured black woman in her late 30s. She wore a tailored business suit that probably cost more than his entire wardrobe. She sat with perfect posture, her hands resting on the steering wheel at the 10-2 position, the universal sign of someone who knew exactly how to handle this situation. She didn't look scared. She looked calm. Too calm. And that infuriated him. A challenge in the dark. Carter cleared his throat. License and registration. No greeting. No small talk. Just authority. The woman handed over her documents without a word. He glanced at the license. Alana Briggs. The name meant nothing to him. Just another nobody trying to act like she belonged here. He smirked. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" She met his gaze without a hint of fear. "No, Officer Carter. Perhaps you can enlighten me." There was something in her tone. Polished, articulate, but with an edge. Like she was already 3 steps ahead of him. Carter's grip on his flashlight tightened. "You were swerving," he said, lying with ease. "Have you been drinking tonight?" She didn't blink. "I wasn't swerving, Officer Carter," she said smoothly. "And I don't drink. Your dash cam will confirm both facts." The way she said it, like she wasn't just answering a question, but issuing a warning, made his jaw clench. Nobody questioned him. Especially not here. Especially not someone like her. "Step out of the vehicle, Mom." Her brows lifted slightly. "On what grounds?" "I said, step out of the vehicle." Carter's hand moved to his radio. "Dispatch, I need backup. Suspect is becoming aggressive." The precinct's favorite game. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars arrived. Their lights bathed the street in red and blue, their presence turning this ordinary traffic stop into something bigger. 2 officers stepped out. Mike Taylor and Brad Foster. Carter had worked with them before. They knew the drill. 1 against 3. It was how they always did it. Overwhelm. Intimidate. Control. Taylor played along. What seems to be the problem here? Carter didn't miss a beat. Subject was swerving, possibly intoxicated. Now she's being uncooperative. Foster circled around to the passenger side, while Taylor positioned himself next to Carter. 3 officers, 1 woman. This was supposed to be easy. But Alana remained still. Her expression never changed. She wasn't arguing. She wasn't begging. She was watching. And that unnerved him. "Officers, I understand you have a job to do," she said, her voice calm. "But I want to be very clear. Any actions you take right now are being recorded." Carter laughed. "Is that a threat?" She didn't flinch. "No, Officer Carter, just a statement of fact." That was it. That was the moment. The moment his ego snapped. "The hell it is," Carter growled, reaching for the door handle. "Out. Now." The arrest that should have been routine. Alana complied. Slow, controlled, measured. She unbuckled her seatbelt, stepping out of the car with the kind of composure that made Carter want to break it. "Turn around. Hands behind your back," Foster barked. Alana didn't move. "I'm assuming I'm under arrest," she said, her voice unshaken. "I'd like to know the charges." Carter grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back with more force than necessary. "Driving under the influence, resisting arrest, and we'll see what else we find." The click of the handcuffs echoed in the still night air. Alana exhaled softly, not a sigh of defeat, but something else, something Carter couldn't quite place. And then, as she was being led to the patrol car, she said the words that sent an unexplainable chill down his spine. "I look forward to discussing this in court, Officer Carter." A mistake he wouldn't understand until it was too late. The ride to the precinct was silent, but Carter's mind raced. Who did this woman think she was? Did she really think a fancy suit and a few big words would save her? By morning, she'd be another case file, another arrest on his record. He had played this game 100 times before. The system worked like a well-oiled machine. Judges rubber-stamped the charges. Prosecutors pushed for maximum penalties. Another troublemaker learned their place. Everything had gone exactly as planned. Except for one thing. If Carter had been paying attention, if he had really looked at her in that moment, he might have noticed something beyond the calm exterior. Not fear, not anger, but the patient, knowing look of someone who had already seen how this would end. Because what Carter didn't know, Alana Briggs wasn't just another target. And by morning, he wouldn't just be facing her in court. He'd be facing something much bigger. The beginning of the end. The precinct was alive with its usual false sense of order. Officers filing reports, phones ringing, the occasional laughter from the break room. But beneath the surface, something was already off. A shift in the air. Something unspoken, yet palpable. And Ethan Carter had no idea that the very foundation of his world was already beginning to crack. The booking that should have been routine. Alana Briggs was led into the booking area, her movements slow and deliberate. Not out of fear, but out of something else. Something calculated. Sergeant Frank Walsh, an old-school officer with years of cover-ups under his belt, took his usual position at the desk. He barely glanced at her. Just another processing, another formality. "Charges?" he asked, not bothering to look up. Carter didn't hesitate. "DUI, resisting arrest." Alana's lips curved slightly at the words, but she said nothing. Walsh finally looked up at her, his fingers hesitating over the keyboard. For the first time, he seemed to actually see her. There was something about her presence, something that made seasoned men pause without understanding why. And then, without breaking eye contact, Alana spoke softly. "Sergeant Walsh." The sound of his name in her voice froze him mid-type. Carter frowned. "You know each other." Walsh's expression flickered. Something close to recognition, but not quite fear, crossed his features. "No," Walsh said, clearing his throat. "Never seen her before." And yet, his hand was shaking slightly as he typed her name. Carter noticed it, but he didn't have time to think about it, because at that very moment, the door to the precinct swung open, and the night shift officially went to hell. The call that should have never been made. Lieutenant Thomas Brooks was not supposed to be here. The man was too high up, too embedded in the real power structure of the precinct, to be dealing with something as simple as a DUI arrest. Yet here he was. The moment he stepped in, the energy of the room shifted. The easy camaraderie of night shift officers vanished. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Officers who had been sipping coffee suddenly found places to be. Brooks wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. His presence alone was enough. He walked straight to the booking desk, his sharp eyes locking onto Alana. Then, without looking at Carter, he gave a single, calmly spoken order. "Release her, now." Carter stiffened. "Sir, with all due respect." Brooks finally turned to him, his eyes like steel. "That wasn't a suggestion, Officer Carter." For the first time that night, a hint of unease crept up Carter's spine. "Sir, the charges are solid." Brooks sighed, rubbing his temple. Then he took a slow step toward Carter, his voice lowering just enough to make it feel personal. "You have no idea who you just arrested, do you?" Carter hesitated. "She's just another citizen." Brooks laughed once, the kind of laugh that wasn't amusement, but pity. Then he leaned in closer, his next words spoken in a tone that sent a cold wave down Carter's spine. "Son, you didn't just arrest a civilian. You arrested a predator. The woman who wasn't supposed to be touched." Carter's confidence wavered for the first time. But before he could respond, the door to the precinct swung open again. And this time, the man who walked in silenced the entire room. Dressed in a flawless military uniform, Colonel Daniel Mercer strode inside with the calm certainty of a man who outranked everyone in the building. His decorations alone demanded immediate respect. Behind him, two high-ranking Pentagon officials followed. A sudden, suffocating weight settled over the precinct. This wasn't normal. This wasn't protocol. And Carter, for the first time since he put on his badge, felt something he wasn't used to feeling. Powerless. Mercer didn't hesitate. He locked eyes with Alana, gave her a brief nod, then turned to Brooks. "Is she free to go?" Brooks straightened. "Already in progress, sir." Mercer's gaze flickered to Carter. He didn't say anything. Didn't need to. His silence alone was an unspoken warning. But Carter, in all his arrogance, still didn't understand. The collapse begins. Carter watched, stunned, as Alana removed her cuffs herself, because somehow she already had the key. She walked toward Mercer, fixing her suit like she had just left a meeting, not a holding cell. Carter took a step forward. "Sir, what the hell is going on?" Mercer glanced at him, then turned to Alana. "Do you want to explain it, Colonel Briggs?" Carter's breath stopped mid-inhale. "Colonel." Alana smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't warmth, but a slow, deliberate warning. Then she turned to Carter, taking a step forward. "You did exactly what you were trained to do," she said, watching his expression shift from confusion to horror. "You saw someone who didn't fit your definition of belonging. You assumed power made you untouchable." She tilted her head slightly. "And you thought your badge gave you the right to put your hands on me." Carter swallowed. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Because suddenly, it all made sense. The reason Walsh hesitated. The reason Brooks ordered her release immediately. The reason Mercer was standing in his precinct at 3 a.m. He hadn't just arrested a random woman. He had arrested one of the most powerful intelligence officers in the United States military. And he had treated her like she was nobody. The realization hit him like a freight train. The arrogance. The mistake. The fact that he had just destroyed himself. Alana leaned in slightly, lowering her voice so that only he could hear. "You should have done your homework, Officer Carter." Then she turned back to Mercer. "We're done here. Let's go." Carter's hands felt numb as he watched her walk out. The entire precinct stayed silent as the Pentagon officials followed. And just like that, she was gone. But Carter's nightmare was just beginning. Because the fallout was coming. And nothing could stop it now. The unraveling had begun. The moment the door closed behind her, Lieutenant Brooks turned to Carter. His expression was no longer amused, no longer pitying. Now, it was cold. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," Brooks said quietly. Carter's pulse pounded in his ears. "But we can fix this, right?" he asked, forcing a grin. "We?" "No, Carter," Brooks cut in. "We can't." Then, without another word, he turned, leaving Carter standing alone in the center of a crumbling world. And outside, in the cold night air, Alana Briggs smiled. Because the first domino had fallen. And the rest of the system was about to come crashing down. The fall of the untouchable. The sun had yet to rise over Millbrook, but inside the precinct, a different kind of dawn was breaking. One that carried the weight of reckoning. For Officer Ethan Carter, everything was starting to feel wrong. Less than an hour ago, he had been on top of the world. He had made an arrest, another troublemaker thrown behind bars, another notch on his record. But now he was standing in the ruins of his own arrogance. Because Alana Briggs wasn't just any woman. She wasn't some civilian he could intimidate. She wasn't someone the system could quietly erase. She was a colonel, a high-ranking military intelligence officer, a predator among men who thought they were hunters. And Ethan Carter had just put his entire career in her hands. The precinct that had gone silent. When Lieutenant Thomas Brooks left him standing in the center of the squad room, Carter had expected someone, anyone, to step in. Maybe Walsh, the desk sergeant, would pat his shoulder and say, "Don't worry, kid. We'll fix it." Maybe Taylor or Foster, his usual backup, would come up with a story to cover their tracks. Maybe someone would remind him that they were the law here, not her. But no one did. In fact, no one even looked at him. Cops who had been laughing over coffee minutes ago were suddenly avoiding eye contact. Phones that should have been ringing were dead silent. The once busy precinct felt like a morgue. Like they all knew something he didn't. And Carter's gut told him that whatever it wasn't good. The call that changed everything. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A single message from Sergeant Wilson, his mentor, the man who had trained him. The man who had taught him how to wield power without consequence. Evidence room. Now, Carter exhaled slowly, forcing his pulse to settle. Okay, this was fine. Wilson knew how to handle things. He always had. Carter squared his shoulders, moving through the quiet halls of the precinct, ignoring the sideways glances as he walked. His badge still meant something. He still had control. Didn't he? A truth he wasn't ready for. The evidence room was dimly lit, a small space stacked with shelves of locked compartments. Wilson was already there, standing with his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Carter closed the door behind him, waiting for the usual pep talk. The "don't worry, kid, we'll fix this." But it didn't come. Instead, Wilson let out a slow, tired sigh. And then he said something Carter wasn't ready to hear. "You just burned down the whole damn house." Carter frowned. "I don't." Wilson cut him off. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" His voice was low, controlled, but carrying a dangerous weight. Carter swallowed hard. She was just another. She was never just another anything. Wilson shook his head. "Jesus, kid, you should have just let her drive away." Carter clenched his fists. "Since when do we let people walk?" Wilson gave him a look. "Since it's Colonel Alana Briggs." The name felt different now, as if saying it out loud carried weight, as if Briggs was no longer just a person, but an unstoppable force. Carter ran a hand through his hair, frustration mixing with the first hints of something he hadn't felt before. Doubt. "We can still handle this," he said. Wilson sighed again. Kid, you don't fix things when the Pentagon shows up at your precinct at 3 a.m. Carter's breath hitched. What? Wilson shook his head. You think Mercer was just here to pick her up? Carter froze. That had been the assumption. That Colonel Mercer had simply come to retrieve Briggs, to take her somewhere else where they could clean up this mess. But now he wasn't so sure. Wilson took a slow step forward, his voice lower now. Here's the truth, Carter. You're not just in trouble. This entire precinct is. Carter felt his stomach drop. Wilson gave him one final look, then muttered under his breath. She didn't just walk away. She's coming back. And when she does, nothing is going to save us. The day that should have been normal. The sun finally rose over Millbrook, but inside the precinct, no one was sleeping. Word had spread. Something was coming. And the worst part, no one knew what. Carter spent the morning glued to his desk, barely touching his coffee, barely looking up. At exactly 9:00 a.m., Captain David Parker, the highest-ranking officer in the department, stormed into the squad room. And the moment he saw Carter, his face darkened. You, my office. Now, Carter's pulse hammered in his ears. He stood up slowly, ignoring the stares from his fellow officers, and followed Parker into the corner office. The door slammed shut behind him. Parker didn't sit. Didn't even give Carter a chance to breathe. Instead, he threw a manila folder onto his desk and growled. Explain this. Carter hesitated. Then, slowly, he picked up the folder. And the moment he opened it, his blood ran cold. Inside was a dossier. Not just any dossier, but one that had been put together overnight. Inside was his entire record. Complaints that should have been buried. Dashcam footage that should have been erased. Emails, messages, and internal reports, somehow all collected in a single night. And at the very bottom, a letter from the Department of Justice. Carter's fingers trembled as he read the words that sealed his fate. Officer Ethan Carter is hereby suspended, pending federal investigation. His vision blurred. What the hell is this? Parker's face was stone. This, Carter, is what happens when you cross the wrong person. Carter's mouth opened, but no words came out. Because it was over. The system that had protected him, covered for him, erased his mistakes. It was gone. And now he was alone. The hunter had become the prey. Carter stormed out of the office, his entire world crumbling around him. The officers who had once looked up to him were now avoiding him. Some even whispered, because they knew. They all knew. He was finished. And at the very moment he stepped outside the precinct doors, the first news vans pulled up. Cameras, reporters, and standing among them, waiting for him, was Alana Briggs. She smiled. Not cruelly, not arrogantly, but with the quiet, unyielding certainty of a woman who had already won. And in that moment, Carter finally understood. He had never been the hunter. He had been the prey all along. And now it was time to face the consequences. The reckoning of Officer Ethan Carter. The moment Ethan Carter stepped outside the precinct doors, the air felt different. It wasn't just the cold sting of the morning breeze against his skin. It was the silence before the storm. Cameras were already waiting for him. Reporters stood in a tight pack, their microphones raised, their eyes hungry for a headline. And among them, standing with the calm patience of a predator who had already won, was Colonel Alana Briggs. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was the final nail in his coffin. Because Carter knew without a shadow of a doubt. His career was over. A fall that no one saw coming. For years, the Millbrook precinct had operated with impunity. They had buried complaints, manipulated evidence, and maintained an iron grip over the city. And why wouldn't they? They were the law. Or at least, that's what they had believed. But power was a fragile thing, and Carter had made one critical mistake. He picked the wrong woman. And now, the entire system that had once shielded him was crumbling beneath his feet. A call no one can ignore. Carter barely made it to his car before his phone rang. The name on the screen made his stomach drop. James Wilson, his mentor. The man who had trained him, who had taught him how to bend the law without breaking it. He hesitated. Then, with shaking hands, he answered. "Wilson," he breathed. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Wilson exhaled, slow and heavy. "It's over, kid." Carter squeezed his eyes shut. "No, it's just a suspension. It'll blow over. It always does." Wilson didn't laugh, didn't sigh. He just said 3 words that destroyed Carter more than any suspension ever could. Not this time. The fallout that no one can stop. Before Carter could respond, his phone buzzed again. Another call. This time from Captain Parker. He ignored it. Then came a notification. A message from one of the other officers in the precinct. Carter opened it. It was a screenshot of an email. Sent from the Department of Justice. Sub-GCT. Immediate federal investigation. Millbrook Police Department. Carter's breath caught. The words blurred together, but he didn't need to read them. He already knew what they meant. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about everything. The Millbrook precinct was under federal investigation. Not just him. Everyone. They weren't just coming for Carter. They were coming for them all. And there was no escaping it. The moment the city turned on him, Carter's hands shook as he scrolled through his phone. His name was everywhere. Social media. News headlines. Viral videos. Corrupt cop faces consequences after wrongful arrest. Justice comes for Millbrook PD. She warned him, and now he's paying the price. Then, a video. A news clip. His own voice, caught on camera during the arrest. "You picked the wrong city to act tough in." And then, her response. "I look forward to discussing this in court, Officer Carter." The video had over 1 million views already. His badge had once made him untouchable. But now it was a target on his back. And the worst part, no one was coming to save him. A last attempt to escape. Carter's car roared to life, tires screeching as he pulled away from the precinct. He needed to think, needed to breathe, needed to figure out how the hell he was supposed to get out of this. But even as he drove, he knew the truth. There was no getting out. Because in the rearview mirror, he saw them. 2 black SUVs following close behind. Government plates. They weren't just investigating him anymore. They were coming to collect. The final blow. He pulled into a quiet street, parked under an old street lamp, and took a deep breath. His phone buzzed again. Another call. But this time, it wasn't from Wilson. Wasn't from Parker. It was from her. From Alana Briggs. For a long moment, he just stared at the screen. His heart pounded. His mouth was dry. Then, slowly, he answered. "Briggs." Her voice was calm. Controlled. The voice of someone who had already won. "Officer Carter." Silence. Then, she spoke. "You thought your badge made you untouchable." He swallowed. "Look, She cut him off. "No," she said. "You look, you listen, and you learn." Another pause. Then she delivered the final blow. "Because by tomorrow morning, Ethan Carter will no longer exist." His pulse stopped. And for the first time in his life, he felt real, tangible fear. Not of losing his job. Not of losing his reputation. But of what came next. Because Alana Briggs wasn't just here to ruin his career. She was here to erase him from the system he once thought protected him. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. The fall of Ethan Carter. The next morning, the headlines hit, and the city changed forever. FBI sweeps through Milbrok Police met multiple officers under investigation. Corrupti police force exposes DAFT or rookie COPARESTs wrong woman. Begedoesnt mean immumanitui milbrok keep dqumbles. And the biggest one of all, Ethan Carter Terramanate under federal arrivayu. In the span of 24 hours, he had lost everything. His badge, his future, his power, and Alana Briggs. She had moved on, because she had bigger enemies to hunt. And Carter, he was already dead to the world. The hunter who became the prey. Carter never showed his face again. The Millbrook precinct collapsed. The city learned the truth. And Alana Briggs, she went on to hunt bigger monsters. Because for her, this wasn't just about one cop. This was about all of them. And now, the real war had begun. Final thought. Alana had warned him. She had given him a chance. But like all arrogant men who think they own the world, Carter had ignored the warning. And now, he was nothing. Just another footnote in a story of power, corruption, and consequences. And somewhere, as the world moved on without him, Ethan Carter finally understood. The badge never made him untouchable. It only made him a bigger target. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.